Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Nectar, Sex, and Soul. I'm your host, Soraya Leonora, and I'm a holistic sex and relationship coach. This is a chance for us to get intimate, to reach far into the mystical, magical, erotic, tender, inspiring, vital, primordial depths of what it is to be human, what it is to express and inhabit these amazing bodies fully, and what it is to make love to the divine in everything we do. We'll be penetrating deeply into the nectar of what it is to be alive and turned on by life, how to transmute pain and hardship into pleasure and medicine, how to embody the union of polarities, including sex and spirit, and how to love every piece of ourselves wholeheartedly. This is a space where we don't just talk about the act of sex, but rather how sexual energy permeates every area of our lives as the seed of creation and the source from which we all came. Exploring sexuality in this way not only takes our sex lives to the next level, but is a catalyst for a life that turns us on in each and every moment, not just in the bedroom. Within you stirs a sexual vitality that is capable of so much more than you could possibly imagine. This is what we explore on Nectar, Sex, and Soul. Thanks for coming to play. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nectar, Sex, and Soul with Soraya Leonora. Today, I have a really special guest that I'm super excited to share with everyone. His name is Simon Yugler, and he is a depth psychotherapist and psychedelic integration coach. And I'm really excited to talk with Simon because we have a lot of crossover in the topics of interests that we work with, that we're passionate about. And you've heard me talk a lot about how holistic sex and relationship coaching really branches into every single area of life. Sex is the energy that we're made of. We are in relationship with ourselves and everything at all times. And so we're going to get into a broad range of topics here today that I'm just really excited to pick Simon's brain about and hear some of his perspectives around. So we're going to get into things like men's work, psychedelics, learning from the law of the land and harmonizing with the earth, shadow work, leadership, and sexuality. And we'll just see where this conversation takes us. I'm sure we could talk all day. There's so many things I want to get into, but yeah, we'll start with one episode for here, maybe have him on again later. So one of the things that really inspired me about Simon is I remember seeing him around in the festival world when I lived on the West Coast. We never actually met or got to talk. And then somehow I stumbled upon his Instagram over the past couple years and was really inspired to see him doing a lot of work with psychedelic integration. And I think this is super, super important work because one of the things that I saw in the festival world is people having these blast off experiences, getting these crazy visions, seeing what's possible, understanding the nature of reality in a new way, and then having no idea how to ground that back into reality and into the world, how to integrate what they learned in a meaningful way. And a lot of people kind of end up chasing those experiences, getting lost in it, and just being really blasted off in the upper chakras, not knowing how to bring it back down into the body, into the earth plane. And it can become kind of a vicious cycle, can be ungrounding. And so I'm always really inspired by people from the festival culture who take the downloads they receive and materialize that into something they can offer in service to the world. So it was really inspiring to me to see all the different facets of work that Simon has been offering and studying and devoting his life to. And, you know, I don't remember who said this. There's a quote around psychedelics being a window rather than a doorway. And so they can really show us what's possible, but they're not like the final destination. They are tools to help us navigate this human experience. And so, yeah, I'm going to just hand it over to you, Simon, to share with us a little bit about what the work is you do, who you are, what really lights you up, about how you are offering your gifts to this world.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Soraya. Well, yeah, I mean, you you definitely got it right. I'm a psychotherapist and an integration coach and currently a retreat leader and therapist at a psilocybin retreat down in Jamaica called Myco Meditations. So I've been working with them for about a year now and stepping into leading retreats and running, the many hours of integration that we do with all of our guests who come down there. And I'm also involved in some of the work that's being done here in Oregon, where I live, for some of the psilocybin initiative trainings that are coming together. One or two particular organizations that I'm working with here to train therapists, facilitators, guides who want to legally offer psilocybin therapy in Oregon, which is a pretty
Mm.
historic thing that's happening right now. Yeah, I love writing and speaking and working with all sorts of folks. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you kind of invoked our mutual roots in the festival world, because it was such a transformative period of my life for sure. And I think you really hit the nail on the head in that, like, I think both of us saw so many folks in that kind of get lost in the sauce, or
Precisely.
kind of or almost kind of addicted to going to the next thing,
Hmm.
like going on like months and months of festival tour, which like I've done, you
I was
know.
one of them for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what I came away with, COVID kind of like closed all that down for about 2 years, right? And
Hmm.
I kind of stepped away a little before that. I started grad school in 2017. So, but I really realized that the festivals are confusing because they appear like a village, right? That's kind of the intention, is to build a village, build this temporary community that comes together and has this a kind of collective transformative journey, which is beautiful. I think what I realize, and I think what a lot of people realize, is that the festivals are actually the liminal space where the transformation happens, and not the village that you come home to. And I
Yes.
think so many of us who were kind of on that like tour life or whatever, wanted it so badly to be the village that we came home to, when in
Mm.
fact it was the initiatory sort of container for transformation that is not meant to be lived in. You're supposed to visit it and then leave. Um,
Well
so
said.
that's why integration kind of came in so strong for me during my studies in grad school.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, very well said. And I certainly lost myself in it for a while. And then for me, it was getting chronically ill that kind of snapped me out of it and made me realize I needed to start working with it in different ways. But it still took some years of kind of pulsing in between and trying to find what is my place in all of this and how do I relate with it in a way that is healthy and fulfilling and holistic and actually helping to create in the world the elements that I love about this rather than escaping from the world to go to this place that is actually, yeah, not the destination. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
thank you for speaking to all of that. And thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks.
So I know another direction that you've gone is doing men's work, which I think is also just crucially important these days. And I've just been loving seeing so much of that on the rise and men gathering together to step into their best selves and to support each other in brotherhood. And I would love to just hear a little bit about your experience in working with men and what that's been like for you.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's not as extensive as some other folks out there, but yeah, when I launched my private practice as a therapist, I immediately started a men's group, and that has been going for over a year and a half now, with a pretty solid core group of guys who really show up and support each other in ways that are consistently, touching and mind-blowing and really powerful. We've seen people go through divorces, seen people go through illness, seen people go through serious, mental health situations. And I think just having that support of men, we don't even, a lot of men's work often talks about like, well, what does it mean to be a man, and what is masculinity? And we do some of that for sure, but really there's just an element of mutual support and camaraderie and love that can get so easily lost in our society, as far as men competing with each other,
Mm.
competing for resources, competing for partners, whatever it is, that to have a space that is just completely dedicated to men supporting each other emotionally, intellectually, being able to kind of speak hard truths in a loving way, I think is one of the most
Mm-hmm.
useful aspects of men's groups and men's work in general, because it's one thing to hear something from your partner, right? If you're in a romantic relationship, especially a heterosexual relationship, right? It's like you don't maybe want to hear that thing from your partner, but if it's said by another man or alternatively like another woman,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can hear that thing a lot better when it's not coming from that person. There's an element of like, I'm not going to say tough love, but it's just a level of accountability that I think men have really lost in just the everyday flow of how our society works.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when we don't have that container to be around a consistent group of men that we trust, trust is the foundation to all of this. But when we don't have that container to have that reflective feedback, to have those mirrors to bring our attention to the ways that we're maybe off
Mm-hmm.
or confused or not thinking clearly or making a mistake or you know agreeing to situations, whether if it's a work situation or a relational situation that actually is not healthy, to
Mm-hmm.
have that mirror to help us move through it and feel supported in that process.
Absolutely. I think that's so essential, just having a safe space to express and reflect with one another. And sometimes we really do need the reflections of other people outside of our partner to see things that are hard to hear coming from them. And that's something that I've received feedback around with women reaching out to me and saying, I really appreciate the work you're putting out there because my partner respects you and there's things I've been trying to get through to him for a long time that he can't hear from me, but then you say it and it suddenly clicks for him. And that's even the same with my own partner. Like he can hear it from somebody else and it clicks. And so I think sometimes we need to hear things from different places to really allow them to land. And there's also something really special about being able to come together in a vulnerable group where we're sharing honestly and we have that trust and we can come out of the ego and into the heart around the things we're struggling with. So I've specialized in working with men for a long time as well. And one of the things that I love seeing is that there are so many issues, particularly around sexuality, self-esteem, confidence, self-worth, body image, relationship, that a lot of men can feel like they're alone in their struggle with and they don't share about it with others. And then when we come together in this group and we see that everyone has similar struggles and that we're never the only one who's dealt with that problem, there's just this huge opening for growth and for self-acceptance and just recognizing it's part of the journey and it's okay, and having other people to share about it with can bring it out of the shadows, out of the shame, and into a space of love and acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I have thought a lot about over the years. I went to live in an Aboriginal Australian community when I was 20 years old. And in that culture, they have what's called men's business and women's business.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently also, before the missionaries really sunk their teeth into that community, they also had business for people who didn't fit into either of those categories. But experiencing that way of relating with gender and sexuality was really massively eye-opening and refreshing for me,
Mm-hmm.
especially as like a child of the 1990s, where there's this kind of like movement to just, oh, we're all the same, everyone treats each other the same, there's no difference between boys and girls, and kind of this like weird 90s utopian thing that so many of us, I think, grew up in, at least if you're, you know, our age, is, I think, kind of ultimately confusing. because we're not the same. And there are things, I mean, in Aboriginal Australian culture, there's certain places, right, sacred sites, ceremonies that you're not even allowed to see. Like if you see them, it's the most sacrilegious, offensive thing that you could possibly do, because it's like you're not supposed to look at that, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And there's a respect for the difference that creates, I think, almost like a sort of I'm just going to use the word polarity,
Yes,
but
precisely.
there's a respect for the division between men and women that I think in our culture we're kind of suffering from the lack of in certain regards. But it's a
Mm.
whole nother conversation, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad you brought this up. It could be like a whole episode on its own. It's a topic I feel very passionately about because we are wired differently as men and women. And I think when you look at a lot of indigenous cultures, they have this deep awareness of the need for there to be separate things that the men and women are doing. And we look at certain cultures having red tent for the women where they go and bleed and they do their feminine arts and support each other as sisterhood. And then the men have their white tent and they do their things and they go hunting together. And there's a mystery between the two. There's things we don't know about what the other side is doing, which feeds polarity in a really strong way because desire needs curiosity. There has to be some curiosity and mystery of like, who are you? What are you about? What's going on in your inner world? And if we know every single little thing about somebody, which is actually impossible, but if we could know every little thing, there wouldn't be that otherness to long for and to have that desire to connect with, because it's like we already know it all. There's nothing to connect upon that is new. And so on my most recent episode, I mentioned a book called The Spirit of Intimacy that's about the Dagara tribe in West Africa. And they have, days when the men get together and do their rituals, the women do their rituals, the women actually all sleep together and the men all sleep together. And so there is this recognition of how do we work with these polarities in a way that we continue to feed the mystery and the balance and all of that. So I love that you spoke to that.
Yeah, and I imagine it's even gotten more for people who are maybe living with their partners, right? I imagine it's gotten even more, that polarity, that mystery, that separation has gotten even kind of more diluted over the last couple of years, especially if people are working from home, right,
Mm-hmm.
and haven't been going out in any kind of social situations. I just think that everything that all of us have gone through over the last couple of years, we really need those spaces to kind of come back to a sense of differentiation
Mm-hmm.
and kind of feeling ourselves, if we're in relationship, who are we as individuals when so many people have kind of been living on top of each other with their partner.
Yeah.
So just another plug for men's work or women's work or whatever kind of gender you choose or are a part of, right? Like I think it's so essential to kind of have that container for you to be you amongst a community of other yous, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
I completely agree. And I think moving in with a partner and keeping polarity alive is one of the most challenging things about relationship work. I've seen it in my own life and that of other clients. And it really takes some extra care and work to stoke that fire and to create spaciousness and to make sure you are still each living your own lives and you have your own hobbies and friends. And of course, there can be crossover there. But if we melt into being the same person and we become this amorphous blob, sex probably isn't going to be happening. There's not going to be a lot of polarity there. We can feel like we're just too enmeshed in each other. And so a lot of couples did end up breaking up during COVID. And I've been working with a lot of couples who stayed together through the lockdowns, but really kind of lost that spark. And we're working to rekindle that because it's very hard when we are in a closed system loop and we're kind of having to do all the heavy lifting of bringing change and novelty into the relationship, and there's not that fresh air to breathe into it from outside sources. So another thing that she spoke to in the spirit of intimacy about the Dagara tribe is they see relationship as being so interwoven with the community, and that it's like insane to have a relationship in isolation from the community, because the community feeds that relationship and the relationship feeds the community.
Is that Sabunfu Some's
It
book?
is, yes.
Yeah, I'm a longtime fan of Molly Doma, who was her
Uh-huh.
husband for a long time, who recently passed away. And his book, Community or Ritual Power and Community, is kind of, I would almost imagine like a kind of the counterpoint to that book, because
Mm-hmm.
I remember he said, without a community, you can't be yourself.
Mm,
And just anyone who's interested in kind of these deeper, more, I would say, decolonized or indigenous takes on community, relationship, why these things are important. I mean, both Mali Doma and Sobonfu Some's work is just so amazing.
I have not gotten to check him out yet, so I'm excited to do that. I know of him, but yeah, she's amazing. So I'm excited to check out the other side of the coin as well.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, what are some of the core issues that you've seen a lot of men facing, just challenges that you see as kind of a common thread these days pulsing through the collective?
Well, that's such a huge question.
Mm-hmm.
I think the root of so much of what I've seen that is not specific to men, but just in general, I think is just a crisis of meaning
Mm.
and a crisis of coming to terms with the fact that your job might not give you your purpose. And despite, everything that we've been told, the fancy car might not give you your purpose, or the house, or even the family and the kids and the wife and everything. Like, that's not going to give
Mm.
you deep meaning and purpose. Some people maybe, for sure, and that's
Right.
beautiful. But I've seen a lot of people, uh, I think, especially again, I think COVID kind of awakened a lot of people's soul, some part of their soul that had been shut down through, the sort of trance of capitalism, to realize that, their job is not who they are, and that they need to figure that out. So I think that's one of the most widespread things I've seen. There's this whole great resignation thing going on with record numbers of people quitting their jobs. I think we're actually in kind of a collective archetypal moment of kind of seeing through some of the layers of, what living in a capitalistic system has tried to kind of, um, entrance people into.
Mm.
And now more and more people are realizing that that's not it. So that's, I think, something I've seen just across the board,
Mm-hmm.
irrespective of gender. But yeah, I mean, that's to me like the root of all of it is not having a deep meaning and purpose in your life. I could go down other routes that I've seen, through working with men and sexuality and kind of these more particular things. But I think at the root of it all is that question of deep meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I really agree. That's a huge piece, and it's something that comes up in my work with clients a lot. Maybe they come to work through some relationship issue, and then we discover that at the core there is this lack of meaning, and that maybe they went through the motions of, oh, I was supposed to get married, I was supposed to have kids, I saw these problems along the way, I felt empty at this point and this point, and I kind of just kept going along the trajectory I thought I was supposed to, thinking that eventually I would get there, I would be happy, it would work itself out. And then they realize that maybe it wasn't, choices they made for themselves. Maybe it was more related to their conditioning, where they were kind of on autopilot. And as we start peeling back the false layers of self that have kind of gotten piled on top of them throughout the course of life, we start to find the truth underneath, that there's a deeper longing there. And I think even alongside the kind of disconnection from purpose. Tied into that disconnection from meaning, there can be a disconnection just from spirit, from source energy, from feeling connected to everything that is, feeling like we are a part of something, because we have become such a hyper individualized society, and people are tucked away in their little boxes, living in such isolation. And that's not how we got here as humans. That's not how we evolved. And so I think people are having this ancient remembrance of what it means to be connected to spirit and to be connected to others, and to live in a way where all of that is integrated and not these separate, isolated little pieces. Like even I've had struggle finding balance between social life and work and health and all my passions and all the things. They all feel like these separate pieces of life. Sometimes we have to drive, 45 minutes to see this person, and it's separate from the rest of the things we're doing, where, the way we evolved, we were working with the gardens while, playing with the kids, while teaching them how to do that, while hanging out with our community and getting our fitness by working with the land. And all of these pieces were integrated with our sustenance, with our connection, with our expression, with the children and the elders. And that's all become very fragmented. So I think that there's a longing to figure out how we bring some of that back into this modern world.
Yeah, as you were talking, it made me think about, just some of the people I've worked with over the years. And there's a sense that I've kind of seen. I've seen people to me in this state of being so run down, so depleted, so unhealthy, so disconnected from themselves, from a deeper purpose or spirit or whatever you want to call it, that I really, it's kind of like, if you do everything that our culture encourages you to do without question, right? If you just accept what's given to you, if you just eat what is most readily available, if you just kind of participate in the lowest hanging fruit of our culture, you will be sick.
Yes.
You will inevitably get sick or depressed or anxious or out of balance in some way. And so I've seen so many folks at either coming to me for, psilocybin therapy down in Jamaica, or just as clients up in the States, that are almost victims of our culture, kind of casualties of the hollowness that our culture creates in people and encourages if you don't question, right? And it makes me think about something that Carl Jung said, I think kind of half jokingly, but he, everyone knows in Christianity, the Holy Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Jung apparently spoke about what he called the unholy Trinity, which is the earth, the body, and the shadow. And the shadow, and the earth and the body all contain the feminine as well. So there's this kind of Western culture as a sort of collective has organized itself around suppressing and essentially exiling those three qualities from individuals and from the collective, right? The earth, our connection to place, our connection to our food, our connection to our ancestors, even who are, live in the earth in a certain sense, our bodies, our actual soma that we are inhabiting, and our body awareness and comfortability in our bodies and acceptance of our bodies, and like having a healthy, friendly relationship with our bodies. And then finally, the shadow material that we all carry, right? The primal materia in each of us that we don't care to talk about, that our culture is organized around not creating space for. All of that, unless you really want it, is going to be essentially exiled from your life, which will eventually probably result in some kind of distress.
Absolutely. I think so many people in the Western world are very disembodied, very disconnected from the body, don't understand the language of their body. There's also a tendency to get very frustrated with our bodies when they're not behaving in the way they're supposed to or that we want them to, without realizing that they're always communicating with us. And that is their way of letting us know that something is out of balance. Our bodies are a mirror for what's going on in our lives, in our internal world. And my body has been my biggest teacher for me in that, of really showing me where I'm out of alignment and constantly calling me deeper into that. And we can get frustrated with our bodies for the way they communicate, but really it's a matter of, are we listening? Do we know how to pick up the signs on what they're trying to share with us? Because they can actually guide us into a much more authentic, integrated way of living if we know how to listen to the language of the body. So that's huge. And if we're just on autopilot giving what our culture feeds us, a lot of that is getting glossed over. We don't see any of it.
Yeah, in fact, when I think back to the many folks that I've had the privilege of working with doing psilocybin work, so many of these folks have never taken psychedelics, aren't essentially, maybe have never done yoga in their life. So they're coming with a kind of they're coming with an expectation of what a psychedelic experience is going to be like, that they're going to sit back and watch the movie, when in fact the movie is in their body, and they're the director and the actor and the editor and all of it. So much of what I find myself doing as far as integration work is bringing their awareness to what's actually happening in their bodies, because psilocybin, like many psychedelics, are bodily somatic medicines as well as cognitive intellectual tools, right? But the experience happens in our lived bodies. And I've just seen again and again and again people kind of having to wrap their minds around the fact that they, one, have a body, and two, that it has stored emotions and experiences and traumas wound into it. That is a huge thing that I've seen so many people have to kind of come to terms with.
Yeah, and the body is an incredible somatic map to the unconscious. We can access so much through the map of the body that we can't access through the conscious mind. And so when we can go into the body that way, there's so much space for healing. And, that was an interesting thing I found as an overlap in between my journeys with psychedelics and then my journey into the world of Tantra and Taoism, is seeing that there was so much of what I kind of discovered in those psychedelic journeys was reaffirmed through these ancient systems. And I love that these traditions embrace both sides of the polarity, and that it's not just about this like transcendent, leaving the body behind kind of pathway to spirituality, but it's this deeply embodied working with the body as a pathway to awakening, not an obstacle to it, working to integrate the shadow with loving wholeness and acceptance, recognizing that every piece has its place in the whole and that we can't just like remove anything or snip it out. It's all got its place. And so to be able to embrace the whole in all of its expressions, I have found to be a really liberating journey. And it is, I think, really damaging the way that we've cut off the feminine, the body, sexuality, the earth, all of these things in the way that we've evolved in Western society over the past several thousand years. So it's really great to see a resurgence of coming back into that for some people.
For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think kind of speaking to the shadow, what do you feel is the importance of integrating the shadow both individually and collectively? And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's such a huge question. I think, again, to invoke Jung, he said something to the effect of no inner work is possible without looking at your shadow. I think he called it the like essential element or the essential condition for self-knowledge, essentially. So he also called it a moral problem. Like working with the shadow is a moral kind of dilemma that almost is required of you at a certain point if you want to more fully understand who you are and more fully live a life that feels aligned and healthy and right. I've worked with a lot of people who have things they feel very shameful about, or like desires or parts of them that they're just totally ashamed of. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, okay, this is shadow material. Great. Let's let's spend some time with that. I think that shadow work strangely has become like a buzzword and kind of a fad, which
Mm-hmm.
is really weird to me as a Jungian. Like, it's just very strange because there's nothing glamorous about it at all. And I don't think shadow work is something that you want to post on Instagram, for instance. It's not something you really want to show the world. It's something that happens either in a very tight therapeutic container, or it's something that happens in a very well held psychedelic experience, or it's something that happens in a really safe relational dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
um, that the shadow can be worked with in a way that is actually alchemizing. That was another metaphor that Jung really loved to invoke, was the metaphor of the alchemical process, because it is essentially an ancient Western tradition that describes the transmutation process of base material in the psyche, what the alchemists called the prima materia,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your base substance, the lead that needs to be cooked and churned and dissolved and burnt and fermented and coagulated, all these different crazy alchemical processes, which is what it kind of feels like when you're in that um, when you're in a kind of shadow process, right? And that might take a couple of days, it might take months, it might take years, but eventually through all of that kind of cooking and churning, there is something that happens where people can turn that lead, or let's say that wounding, because that's what it is for us in our psyches. It's some kind of deep wound or fear or shame, right? That eventually can become um, a place where your gifts and your power and your deep offering to the world can really come through, almost only through that kind of process of deep introspection, sitting with uncomfortable things. I think that's why psychedelics can be so useful, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they almost offer a accelerated pathway to confronting some of that stuff, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think there's no meaningful psychedelic work without shadow work. And I also think there's no meaningful work in sexuality or men's work or any of this without being able to kind of make space for the stuff no one really wants to talk about.
I completely agree. And the other Jung quote that comes to mind around this topic is a tree's branches can't reach to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And that has totally been my experience, is that where the wound is, where the shadow is, there's an incredible pathway to discover some of our greatest gifts and medicine to offer the world, but we can't access that until we really go through that journey through the underworld and face these parts of ourselves and kind of bring them out of the shadow so we can see them and look at them and speak to them. And I think the demonization of the shadow is part of what is so problematic, because it's like when we stuff something away into the shadows, it kind of festers and becomes this even scarier thing than what it even was to begin with. When there's too much shame to talk about it, when there's not a safe space to talk about it, when we feel like we're the only person dealing with it and something is inherently wrong with us because this is part of our experience, that can get stuffed down and just turn into even deeper perversions or twisted permutations of what it was to begin with. And when it has that safe space to breathe and to be looked at and worked with, that's where that alchemy is possible, and we can transmute it into something truly meaningful and powerful to work into our life. And I love looking at this through the astrological perspective too, that our Chiron placement is the wounded healer. It's like where we have that wound that we came into this life with, that is part of our struggle to work with, but through doing so, it leads us to a deeper piece of our purpose and what we can offer to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, by its very nature, the shadow will always get suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a question of, do we have the proper rituals to play that out in our lives, whether it's through some sort of collective experience or through some one-on-one kind of ritualized container, or if it's some kind of internal visionary work. But there has to be some sort of container for that to emerge in a safe way, because I think if the shadow is just sort of placed in the light for everyone all the time, it would just be madness and chaos. Like
Yeah.
the shadow is not bad. It's not a bad thing. It's like just an element of the psyche
Mm-hmm.
that we don't want to look at, right? But if there's a safe ritualized container for that to happen, then that work can really be done in a healthy way.
Right. Yeah, it's not meant to always be out in the open. It's just the other side of the coin. It's meant to be in the darkness, and the darkness is not bad. And I think that's another topic that I just love to get into. I think the darkness itself has been very demonized. And in many ways, the darkness is that wombic, fertile place of potential. It's the feminine, like dark, fertile black soil. It's the muddy, bloody experience of birth and death and just the churning of the cycles. And I think a lot of times even just the term darkness or the term shadow can be stigmatized in this kind of way. And I personally think it's really important to develop a relationship where it's recognizing that it is a piece of the whole, and no, it doesn't express in the same way as the light or the part of ourselves that we are always sharing with the world. But it's equally as valid, it's equally as important and deserving of our love and our willingness to go there if we want to live a whole, integrated, fulfilling life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about such a massive topic. I'm thinking about men and darkness, or men and, yeah, I'm thinking about kind of, at least again, some of the messages that I received growing up collectively, and that I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of men received growing up, which is that it's not okay to, essentially, like, masculine darkness is not okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that any sort of, let's say, aggressiveness, or like sexuality that is masculine and dark, is just categorically unsafe,
Mm-hmm.
which is a message that I grew up with, which has been a long process of disentangling from, because I don't think it's true, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a place for everything, and it's really about the container. But just going back to your question about what I see with men, there is, yeah, I've encountered a lot of men who it almost seems like there's a sort of agreement they made at some point in their life that they weren't going to embody their full masculinity, or that they wanted to sort of discard parts of themselves in favor of being this sort of like shining new age guy in flowing white clothes and like the Shipibo necklace, and like,
Yep.
eating kale like for every meal. And it's like, okay, like, I don't, power to you, if that's really who you are, great. I have a sense that maybe it's not who you really are at your core, that this is a really nice front that might get you some points in certain social circles, but in fact is a sort of deep denial of your own shadow and darkness because it's terrifying, So to me, just kind of thinking about these larger themes of darkness, darkness is like you said, it's fertile, it's a creative force. There's a way of thinking in depth psychology that spirit is expansive and kind of moves upward and outward, and soul is moves downward and kind of sinks its roots down into the soil of your being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've known a lot of really spiritual guys, but I don't know how soulful they were.
That's a really awesome distinction. And I see this happening with the feminine too, where there's this Madonna whore split, where it's like you can either be the Madonna, where you are the good girl, the good mother, you're pure, you're worthy of respect, you're the kind you bring home to mom. And then the whore, who is exciting and fun and sexual and free, but not worthy of respect. And you're not going to bring her home to family. You're not going to be in a relationship with her. And they are like these two caricatures of the two sides of the feminine that are disintegrated from each other. And ultimately, everyone has the light and the dark within them. And I think the whole light supremacy thing, that the light is better, is really problematic. And yeah, I see the dark as just being so rich, and it's a piece that needs to be integrated. They are two sides of the same coin. One is not better than the other. We cannot separate them. And so yeah, like these super spiritual guys that are maybe lacking soul, that shadow, if repressed too long, will come out in weird twisted ways and will blow up. It's something we cannot shut out. We can't just get rid of it. And
Yeah.
I love you speaking to this because, yeah, I think it's huge. It's something, too, that I've worked with around men who are like, I want to be really spiritual and I want to study Tantra and I want to be really sacred with my sexuality. And we don't want to cut off the roots. We don't want to castrate you in the process. Like bringing forth that male aggression in the right context, when it is connected to heart, when it's connected to consciousness, can be a very powerful, sexy thing. There are a lot of people who would love to see that quality come out in their partner. It's when it's disconnected from awareness that it can be this really scary thing that can turn into like violative, abusive tendencies. But when it is integrated, when it's connected to our whole being, there is absolutely a healthy space for that to express.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. I just want to invoke the late Robert Bly, who one could say founded this whole thing called men's work or the men's movement. Robert Bly said that for men, the way to enter the soul um, can almost only come through grief. And
Mm,
that, men, just by nature of who we are and almost kind of how we're organized, we're not going to go there unless we have to. And so often it's grief, it's deep loss that opens that doorway for men to be able to enter a soulful space. So, I mean, have you ever met someone who hasn't lost anything? I mean, it's like you're talking to someone who just hasn't lived. There's a
yeah.
sense of like, oh, like that's nice.
Uh-huh.
But there's a depth that grief provides, especially for men. It's not exclusive to men. I think
Mm-hmm.
grief is a deepening force for the psyche in general.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically for men, the way into darkness, the way into soul can only almost happen through some sort of grief or loss. And I think it's been abundantly clear to anyone who's been paying attention that there is quite a lot to have grief around over especially the last few years, but in general. And it's kind of almost like if you're not grieving something, then you're not paying attention.
Mm. I love that you brought this to attention because, and the way that you said, somebody who has never lost, it's almost as if they've never lived. And it just shows that interconnection between death and life and how they really do enrich each other. And grief is that journey into the underworld. It's that journey around the death, the loss of something that actually can make us come more fully alive, more embodied in our humanity, more present to what is. And we live in a society that really conditions men to not really feel emotion. Anger is kind of the one that's most celebrated among men as an emotion besides being happy or whatever. But grief and sadness and tears are something that are often portrayed as not okay for the masculine to experience. So that makes a lot of sense that grief would be that portal to these deeper, unaccessed depths of the soul.
Absolutely. Yeah. Robert Bly has a bunch of really wonderful work on grief. Francis Weller, who is a psychotherapist and kind of one of Bly's disciples, is a really beautiful writer who writes about this a lot, just for folks who might want to kind of pursue that in themselves.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, something that you work with a lot and have talked about a lot that I think ties into so much of what we're speaking to is initiation. And I would love to hear how you define initiation and its purpose in the human experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think grief is a perfect segue
Exactly.
because the journey of initiation, just like the journey through grief, is a movement down and in. It is the opposite of the up and out kind of light chasing behavior that we so often see. It's almost like if someone knew what they were signing up for as far as an initiation, right? If they knew what it was going to be, if they had a blueprint and an outline of like, what is this experience going to be, they probably wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a component of an initiation is really getting taken to your limit and past that, and actually having your psychic shell, your ego, cracked open, which no one would sign up for. Despite the amount of ayahuasca you've drank or whatever, it's like no one actually wants to sign up for that. It happens in an initiatory moment that is outside of your control. And this is the most important part, hopefully held by people who've been there before and know how to usher you through that and out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's a lot of people who have what Michael Meade called unfinished initiations, right? We see this, I think, most commonly with war veterans coming back. They go through this deep, intense, shattering experience in war, and they have no way to come back from it.
Mm-hmm.
So there, initiation is classically kind of seen to have three parts, right? There's the separation from the known, the descent, which is kind of between the separation and the liminal. And you get down to the second phase, which is called the liminal phase of transformation, right? That's where you don't know what's going on. That's when you're, let's say, under the influence of whatever kind of drug or medicine that you're taking, or it's when all the stuff is falling apart in your life. That's the liminal. And by the way, I think we've all been in a liminal space for about 2+ years. So just to kind of put a little side note in that.
Mm.
And then the third phase is reintegration back into your community, reintegration back into your full self, your kind of grounded consciousness. And traditionally, you would come back to the village and be seen as a new person,
Mm-hmm.
a new kind of person with a level of knowledge. Basically, you'd come back and people would say, yeah, that person's seen some shit and I respect them. And now they are entrusted to something that is really, really important. Um, so, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of a basic breakdown of the experience. But I think these days in our Western culture, we discarded that a long time ago. And we've been living with the effects of not having that initiatory process for centuries. And I think we're most acutely seeing it today in just kind of all of the various problems and mental health situations that people find themselves in.
Absolutely. I think that the lack of cultural structured initiation and rites of passage has left a lot of people feeling really lost. And I think that's a part of the disconnection from purpose. I think a lot of people never really have that chance to have their ego shattered in a way that helps them come home to the truth of who they are rather than who they've been conditioned to be or who they're expected to be. And so they continue along this trajectory that society or their family or whoever has outlined for them, rather than getting to go down and in and come home to that core within and to be reborn through that transformative process. And one of the ways that I see this show up a lot is a lot of uninitiated adults who are not able to be independent, or they're still in this space of being stuck in between a kid and an adult, wanting to rely on their parents or society in these ways that a child would more so, and not having the tools or the courage or knowing their own strength to be able to step into the adult. And in a lot of these initiations, it'll be like, the boy is dead, the man is born. You are no longer the boy, you're no longer the child, and you're stepping into this place of now being able to walk as an adult in the world, having gone through this challenge where you've now seen what you're capable of. You've moved through something deeply challenging and discovered new parts of yourself that you can carry forth. And I see a lot of people who are kind of in this place of, well, I still want the benefits of being a kid, but I also want the freedoms of being an adult. And I'm trying to hold on to both. And it's got me stretched in this kind of limbo state where I'm not able to actually really self-actualize and apply my potential and show up with a sense of purpose and meaning in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's safe to say also that, we don't live in a culture with any intact rituals of initiation,
Exactly.
Graduation parties, bar mitzvahs, whatever, like they don't really cut it. I think a lot of the weird stuff we see with fraternities, are very sort of strange emanations from the unconscious of trying to approximate, trying to get close to some sort of initiatory society. And I think for the most part, it fails people pretty miserably. But it's interesting, initiation is an archetype, a deep psychological archetype that is in us. And it's interesting, like this fraternity thing, I don't think they know what they're doing, but I think the psyche does, So I can just speak personally and say, for me, I had to, the first major initiation in my life, I would say, was heartbreak and grief for sure. But, then sought out experiences mostly through international travel, through connecting with Indigenous peoples in various parts of the world, and throwing myself into situations traveling in Africa by myself, or the Middle East or South America, that were just really intense. And I just have so many stories of really questioning if I was going to get out of this one. And those experiences made me. Absolutely.
I totally agree with the idea of it being this deeply embedded archetype. Bill Plotkin said something along the lines of kids trying to initiate themselves without knowing that that's what they're doing, and then ending up in drunken car accidents and this sort of thing. And I think a lot of us can think back on that time of coming of age and just having this pull to push the edges and to push our limits and to see what we're capable of. And that period of my life was also one of just, throwing myself across the world to different countries with not much of a plan and just seeing what happened, just following a calling where I knew that there was a piece of myself I needed to discover or reclaim by going on this journey, and just going into the mystery. And our culture in the West doesn't have much infrastructure around that. And so a lot of people either don't have those experiences at all, or they throw themselves into it and maybe don't have the proper integration. And I think it's a big core of that lack of purpose and meaning that we were speaking to earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
There was something that I heard you say in one of your previous interviews that I liked a lot too, about how eventually we shift from the initiated to the initiator and really helping facilitate bringing others through that, which also is that's an initiation in and of itself to shift into that role and be helping others with that. And you said something about just meaningful service being a huge core of moving through that initiation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I love the way you spoke to that.
Yeah, it's interesting as so many people are gravitating towards the field of psychedelics right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's this rush to be the one serving the medicine, or to be the one in the sort of seat of authority. And having been in that seat, it's not something to rush towards. Sometimes there's an experience that I've had as a therapist where someone comes to me and they like share a lot of what's going on with them. And I think there's a part of me that thinks like, oh wow, you really need some help. And I'm like, wait, I'm the help, you know? And it's the same with this leadership or kind of being in this initiator role, which I almost don't want to claim that because, I think initiation is an ongoing process, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense of that I've had a few times in psychedelic spaces of like, whoa, like somebody's got to do something. And then it's like, wait, that's me. I got to do something. There's a sense of authority earned versus authority claimed or unearned, and leadership earned versus leadership claimed. And I think this is a really interesting dynamic that everyone in the psychedelic world and field is going to have to grapple with. I would be really interested to have kind of more nuanced discussions as a larger community about like leadership in psychedelic space, because it is that role of you're not just a guide, but you might be initiating someone into the rest of their life. And I've heard, I think again, it was Michael Mead say, if you are going to be a mentor for someone or steward some kind of initiatory process for someone, you are essentially in some way responsible for that person for the rest of your life. And I mean, that's a big weight to carry. There's an element to that that is true. And there's an element to that that is like, whoa, I don't know if I can carry all of that. Right. But it's just this question of just because you can, should you, you know?
Right.
And I don't know. I don't know. It's a conversation that I think is just evolving and needs to continue to happen within the larger community. But yeah, just this idea of real leadership, initiated leadership, where someone's desire for leadership and power is coming from, and if they're ready for that.
Absolutely. I think it can be really glamorized and it's an enormous amount of responsibility. And I think each time we are holding space for someone, that's an initiation in and of itself for us and for them. It's like each person is going to bring something new that we have to work with or take deeper and show up for. And the deeper we are going into our own initiation process and our own shadow work and knowing the depths of our soul and being able to know and trust ourselves, the more fully we can show up for that. And knowing that we can't ever be fully prepared for anything, but knowing
Yeah.
how to push that edge in a healthy way.
I also want to say something that I've heard often, which is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll kind of say this gently, but this notion of, oh, the medicine told me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think that ever would fly in an indigenous tradition. I don't think you get to just claim the fast lane because the medicine told you something. That said, like, I don't want to discount anyone's vision or, revelation that they've had, right? I think medicine can tell us a lot of things. I really want to just focus on this for a second. It's like, just because you were told to do something doesn't mean that it's a permission slip to put on a Shipibo Kushma and all of a sudden start ordering ayahuasca from Peru. Like that's not it. It doesn't work
Absolutely.
like that.
Not
And
at
in
all.
fact, and in fact, that's very, very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of like, a Shipibo, Onanya, or shaman goes through multiple master's and PhD length trainings, right, that are internal as well as external to be able to even approach that position. So there's just such a hunger in our culture and kind of larger community for this power. And a lot of people I hear justify it as like, oh, well, the medicine told me I needed to serve. And it's like, well, be that as it may, I still don't think that that makes you at all prepared or ready for it.
Right. And even the phrase to serve, it's like we want that to be the focus of how are we offering ourselves in service rather than am I trying to do this to get power? And people can be very cavalier in the way they go about that and not recognize all the nuances to what it actually means to hold a space with integrity. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what does that mean to be able to step into leadership with integrity?
Another great question. Yeah. I mean, what does it mean to step into leadership with integrity? I think it means to, one, first and foremost, doing your own work, right? And to be in some sort of a situation where you can be, like we talked about earlier, have that healthy mirror to bring your attention to when you're maybe off, when something isn't really sitting right, that you're surrounded with other people who can hold you accountable in a way that is meaningful. I've definitely seen a lot of people have this lone wolf thing with holding space in medicine, or maybe they have like their tiny little crew. But yeah, I think there's an element of just consistently doing your own work. That means if you're working in the Shipibo tradition, like consistently dieting. It means if you're working in a more psychotherapeutic tradition, like consistently having your own therapist. um, so yeah, I mean, those to me is just like the foundation, right? The foundation. And I think secondly is to try to surround yourself or have relationships with elders who have maybe seen a thing or two more than you have, even if it's not directly what you're trying to do. But to have elders in your life that you can run things by, because they're not going to be scared of hurting your feelings, or they're not trying to, an elder is like not trying to impress you, right? So they will run the risk of maybe rupturing the relationship a little bit in order to hold you accountable to something. So there's that. And then there's an element of humility that's required. And really, as far as psychedelic space goes, really coming back to the knowing that you are not healing this person. They are healing themselves with the assistance of the medicine. And you are there to basically just make sure that they don't die and that they're able to come through the experience in a way on the other side that is impactful and meaningful and healing. But you're not doing anything to them.
Right.
So I'll just leave that there.
Right. You're helping them find the power within rather than exerting any sort of power over them. You're being a conduit to hold this space, but ultimately we want to be empowering people to go on their own healing journey and not be taking credit for that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I like what you spoke to of humility and bringing elders in as well, because sometimes there can be that really inflated ego. Like think of teenagers when they think they know everything, and especially if they haven't been initiated, and they can have this huge ego that they know better than everybody else. And I think all of us can get stuck in that before we've had these experiences that check our egos, that are humiliating, until we have that lived embodied wisdom. And so it's important to have other reflections that can help us track with where we actually are. And there's a concept in Taoism that I really love, that I think speaks to leadership in a really beautiful way. And it's that true yang must come from and return to true yin. And so if we are in a position of leadership, we need to tune into that yin field first and really listen, feel the lay of the land, check in with our people, check in with our intuition, with our body, really ask, what is the situation calling for before we make that yang decision and take that yang action. And then returning to the yin field is coming back to reflect, to check in. How did that land with me? How did this affect the situation? How did that land with my people? What do they have to say in response to all of this? And there's that pulse of coming back in to the yin fields. And I think we see a lot of people operating from this distorted false yang energy in the way that they lead. I see lots of our politicians and world leaders doing this, where they're not tuning into the yin field at all. And they're just on this trajectory of doing whatever they want and not actually paying attention to that yin field at all. So I really love that principle as a way to check in with the way that we're going about things and stay in balance.
Yeah. And when I hear you talk about the yin field, like I can make sense of that in my own head, but like what comes up for me is just the element of self-reflection, right? And Michael Meade again tells this story of watching this film of these Aboriginal Australian elders doing this ritual dance that had never been recorded on film before. They were doing it to preserve the ritual, basically. And in the middle of the dance, they stop and they kind of stand and look at each other and like, wait, are we doing this right? Are we going the right way here? How did they used to do it? Do you remember? So like, even in this very like sacred ritual thing, there's a moment of like, wait, are we going the right way? So I just love that story because it just really invokes this idea of like being accountable and having a level of reflection and feedback. Like you got to ask how you're doing. You got to take a moment to ask your peers, ask the people you're serving, ask your elders, am I going the right way? Is there something you're seeing that I'm not seeing?
Absolutely. That curiosity is key. I think being willing to maintain an open mind, a beginner's mind, and to stay curious and to welcome feedback is huge. And it's how we do things as a community and as a team rather than letting our egos run the show. Well, I guess my last question before we wrap this up would just be, is there anything that you want to speak to around just what are some of the most important factors involved in working with psychedelics in a safe, respectful, constructive, transformative way? Because I think as we are moving into these phases of legalization and decriminalization, there's a lot of potential for that to get really messy. And a lot of people want to explore these realms. And how can they be sure that they're going about this in a way that is going to offer a constructive experience and not leave them with these unfinished initiations?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I don't know if I can answer it because it's so big and there's so many different things to consider. But I guess I can just answer maybe with like a story that feels relevant for me, which is back in 2015. I spent about about a month and a half with a Shipibo family doing what I basically call an ayahuasca boot camp with a small group of other people and three generations of Shipibo curanderos, and each one of us were expected to hold a ceremony during that time. And it was through being in that seat of feeling what it feels like to, be running a ceremony that I really realized like, wow, this is intense and powerful. And I don't think it's for me. I loved it. I would totally do it again. Right. But there was something about that experience that helped me really get clear that I don't want to be the one passing someone a cup of ayahuasca. I would happily be the one next to that person. I would happily be the one bringing groups of foreigners to that person, who, by the way, I think should most likely be indigenous. Um, I, for myself, can speak to the realization that I would rather be a conduit or a bridge to that particular tradition, because it just felt right for me. What came out of that wasn't a sort of swearing off of ayahuasca by any means, but was more of a realization that the tradition that felt really appropriate for me to claim was the tradition of depth psychology and the tradition of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and Robert Bly and kind of all of these older mentors who have passed that did so much work around our culture, and being able to kind of immerse myself and root down into that tradition, the depth tradition or the mythological tradition or the mythopoetic tradition, as it's sometimes called. That to me felt like an appropriate way to approach this thing that as Westerners, we don't really understand yet. That thing being psychedelics. We don't really understand it. And so for me, I just keep coming back to what is the tradition that feels like is my own, that I can frame this experience in a way that might actually be like culturally appropriate and conducive rather than appropriative, and maybe not really fully resonate with as many people as it could. I'm not like trying to diminish at all, let's say in this instance, the Shipibo tradition. I deeply love it. It's just not my tradition. And I think there's an element of kind of honesty that many people should consider. And that said, there's many people out there operating with a really deep relationship to the Shipibo culture, who have a deep relationship with the people that they work with, that they train with. So I'm not discounting that at all. I'm just saying for me, there's an element of that doesn't feel like mine. And my life isn't looking like I'm going to go down that path of attempting to have some sort of claim over that. So I found a tradition that I could really, without any question, feel was my own.
I love that answer. I think, yeah, cultural context and just how does this weave into my personal life, my psyche, my language, so to speak, is really important, because that's also a piece of how we integrate it. If it is tying into the rest of who we are and how we're living our lives and makes sense in the way that we live our day-to-day life. And so finding what that is for us and finding ways that we can integrate it so it's not this isolated experience we have that feels very foreign to the rest of who we are, but there's a bridge between these experiences we have and the way that we integrate them into our lifestyle as a practice, as something that is a journey, not a destination that we're trying to achieve or check off the box of experiences, but something that can continue to be folded into our day-to-day life and shape us thereafter. Well, Simon, it's been so awesome having you here today. I would love to just hear a little bit more about how we can find more of your work, what you're up to that you would like to share with us. And for anybody who wants to dive deeper into your world, how can they find you?
Sure, yeah. You can find me through my website, which is depthmedicine.com. You can email me through that. You can sign up for my email list and get a kind of quick little 6-week shadow work course that'll be just sent to your email for free if you sign up on that. I don't really send out a lot of emails through that, so you won't get any kind of spammy, weird messages. But yeah, let's see. I'm going to be speaking at the TAM Integration Jam, which is coming up May 20th through 23rd. So I'll be speaking on a panel there and also presenting an extended workshop for integration coaches and providers. That's about it for right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It's been so awesome to talk with you. It's been a really enriching conversation, and I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it. So thank you everyone for tuning in with us today on Nectar, Sex, and Soul. And all of Simon's info will be in the show notes. So please do find him, give him a follow, dive deeper into his work if you feel inspired, and have a beautiful day, everyone. Ciao. Thank you so much for dropping into Nectar, Sex, and Soul with me today. It's been a pleasure to connect with you. If this episode lit you up or illuminated something impactful for you in some way, I invite you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone you feel would love to hear it. To learn more about my work, check out sorayaleonara.com, sign up for my newsletter, and follow me on Instagram and YouTube, where I share tons of free content, special offers, and ensure you're the first to know about my new offerings. I offer private coaching as well as courses, workshops, and retreats, so be sure to stay in touch if you'd like to go deeper together. Thank you, loves. Have a gorgeous day. Ciao.